Okay guys, welcome to another video. In today's video I wanted to talk about fuel storage, why store fuel, how to do it safely, and some things to keep in mind. So as you can see, this is one of my supply stashes of stored fuel. In the back, those are steel jerry cans, 4 of them, so that's roughly 21 gallons of fuel. Well, 21, 22 gallons, a 5 gallon, 2.5 gallon, 2.5 gallon, and then in my other workshop I have like 1 or 2 more 5 gallon plastics. So I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube, some good information and some not so good information, and also possibly dangerous information. So I wanted to talk about why to store fuel, how to do it safely, and how to do it economically, and how to save money in the long run by not having your fuel go sour so you can't use it, because once you get bad fuel you kind of have to waste it. So the first thing to keep in mind, today I'm just going to be talking about storing gasoline. In the future I might talk about storing firewood or propane or diesel or kerosene or alcohol or all the other fuels. But today I'm going to talk about gasoline because it's kind of the most universal fuel. The most amount of people will need gasoline: cars, generators, lawnmowers, chainsaws, outdoor equipment, tractors, different types of equipment, and mainly your car. So the first thing I want to cover is container. And we're only going to be talking about portable containers because I find them to be the most practical and realistic option for most people out there. So you have metal and you have plastic. Which one's better? Many people will say metal. Metal seems to be kind of more durable. People think of it as more durable. And metal's a really good option. The downsides are corrosion and rust, corrosion, and the price. So these cans in the back, I got them years back, but they were about $30 a piece. And now to find quality metal containers, they're like upwards to $100. They're like $80. So if you want like to have a supply of fuel and you want to do it on the cheap, metal is going to cost you. Now over here, plastic, there's a lot of downsides of plastic containers. The main thing being their seams. So this seam here on the bottom, what I tend to see happen at work is the bottom of the fuel can where that seam is will burst. The other issue is plastic is air permeable, which means it's waterproof, but air can still go from inside to outside and vice versa. So plastic's air permeable, which isn't really what you want when you want to store fuel long term. But another disadvantage, and this kind of goes for metal too, but with this super helpful environmental agency known as CARB, California Air Research Board, they wanted to protect the environment and protect people and limit the amount of gas vapors pretty much going out into the atmosphere. So they came up with these nifty caps. There's one there, there's one here, that are super state of the art, so you never spill any fuel and gas vapors don't get evaporated into the atmosphere. So it makes using the can a whole lot easier and safer and everything. And everyone should be thanking CARB right now for these beautiful gas caps. But you can see in the back that old school standard shoddy one, that kind of an old design back there. Those ones, they're not as safe and they're not as environmentally friendly, and they're not as good because that's why they updated to the safe design, but those ones still work just fine. And truth be told, I'm kind of more of a fan of the old school. I'm kind of an old school dude, so I like kind of that old style. But that's another consideration to keep in mind with plastic containers is their super cool, innovative, nifty gas caps. Depending on who you are, maybe you're somebody that isn't that smart, and it might make it harder to transfer fuel with these gas caps as opposed to that type. A big advantage of the plastic cans is they're cheap and they're readily available. Like, these tend to be a little more expensive with this super nifty cap, which makes it so much better. But like this gas can in the back, I got at Fleet Farm for like $8, right? And it's a 5-gallon, holds a lot of fuel, and I've had that gas can, that specific one, for like 10 years maybe, going on 10 years. So they're very cheap and economical. Between the two, what I would recommend is having some of each. It's kind of the best of both worlds. There's pros and cons to both. So just, I would get some of each. We kind of talked about the pros and cons, and some people are all steel metal jerry cans, and other people, they like the lightweight and the non-corrosive attributes of plastic. On a personal note, I'm more a fan of metal, especially for long term. But the plastic ones, I've been using plastic gas cans for years to store fuel just fine. The next thing I want to talk about is the fuel. Depending on where you live, in the Midwest, they've been doing it for like probably going on 20 years now, that they add ethanol into standard gas to make it cheaper. Ethanol, think of it as corn alcohol or corn syrup, depending on how you feel about it. Ethanol on its own is not bad. Many people say ethanol is horrible for engines and it gums up carburetors. Ethanol actually stores pretty much indefinitely, and many people might be like, no, that's not true. But ethanol, if it's grain alcohol, think of it as alcohol. Alcohol pretty much never goes bad. The high percentage alcohol never goes bad. The issue though is you're trying to add alcohol into engines that are designed to run on gasoline. So you start running into issues there. So if you're storing gasoline, what I would recommend is storing, I call it E0 gasoline. And it's hard to find depending on where you live. As an anecdote, when we drive down to Texas twice a year, going through Iowa and Oklahoma and stuff like that, gas is always a lot cheaper in most places. But the reason that is because it's like an E30 or an E40. They add a lot of ethanol into that fuel, so you get a cheaper price, but it's not pure gasoline. Where I live and where most people live in today's day and age, if you look next to the pump, you might be like, no, I get standard gasoline, what I put in my car. When you look closely, there's a note on there saying that by federal law, they're allowed to add up to 20% ethanol, I believe. So many times what you're actually buying is E20, so it's 20% ethanol. Now for a car that you'll be driving on a daily basis, it'll get constantly cycled through. You probably won't run into issues. But when it comes to storing it, you can store gasoline with a little bit of ethanol, but it's going to make it harder and not as conducive to long-term storage. All this stuff here is, as you can see, that one I labeled E10, that one E10, that one E10, and then these ones are E0. Now, where do you find E0? Generally speaking, you have to look around for it, but at certain pumps, A lot of times in my neck of the woods, it'll be yellow and it will say ethanol free. And it tends to be a 91 or a 93 octane. And it's going to be expensive. More expensive than normal gasoline. So you have to weigh the pros and cons. Do you want to save a few bucks and have a shorter shelf life for your fuel, or do you want to take as many variables out and kind of buy the top grade fuel to get the best results? I chose, for those ones, E0. These have been in storage for September 18, so it's pretty new. Along with the grade of fuel is the next thing I want to talk about. Fuel stabilizer. Some people say you don't need to use fuel stabilizer, and truth be told, all the gas in the gas cans that I use at work, I've never added fuel stabilizer to, and we use them for chainsaws, lawnmowers, tractors, machinery, and we're constantly going through the gas. And part of the reason why I've never used stabilizer is because we're cycling through that gas so quickly, it's never sitting for more than a couple weeks. The two that I use are Stable 360 Marine and Startron Enzyme Fuel Treatment. Now, the one that I don't have is Prig, P-R-I-G, Prig, and then they make Prid, P-R-I-D. And some people say that's the best one around. I've used it in the past. My issue, and it's like $30 for a container this size, but you use barely any. My issue, like the Prig is good for if you have a 500-gallon storage tank. You can add however much, maybe that would be like a full bottle. My issue with Prig is when you're adding it to small containers, you have to use like a quarter ounce, and it's like hard to measure, and you always use a little bit more, and then that bottle actually ends up not lasting as long as it's advertised. And it's hard to find in stores, so you can buy it on Amazon. But I just rather get something I can buy off the store shelf. So the one I use is the Stable 360 Marine, and I've used the normal Stable, and I saw this at Fleet Farm, and it's more conducive for use. It's meant for marine applications, so fuel that's going to be near large bodies of water. And it was about the same price, and it's meant more for E10, E20 gas with a little bit of ethanol. So that's what I use. Then this Startron isn't really well known, and I'm not really going to recommend it. I've just started using it, but just reading kind of what it does, it seems like it should work just fine. Many people get very hung up on the type of stabilizer. Just do a little bit of research, see what's available at your store, and rock on. Generally speaking, they all are fairly good. Personally, I use Stable and now this Startron. Other people use Prig, some people use Seafoam. It's kind of pick your poison, experiment a little bit, and see what works for you. So the next thing I want to talk about, if I can get this to focus, is the temperature. Temperature, think of fuel storage as similar to food storage. The things that detract from the shelf life of fuel would be access to moisture, access to air or lack thereof, temperature, and keeping it out of direct sunlight. If you kind of use those principles, you can drastically increase the shelf life of stored fuel. And by not following those rules, you can have the top of the line fuel the highest octane, the best fuel stabilizer. But if you store it in direct sunlight and it's like 120 degrees and the container is not airtight, that fuel is going to go bad very quick. So as you can see, and yes, you're seeing this correctly, it's about 44 degrees, and that's no typo. It's kind of chilly, but fuel likes that. It the same principle as freezing food to extend its shelf life. Fuel likes lower temperatures. Now, I'm not saying you should keep it in a air-conditioned building year-round, because that would get expensive, but find an area which will kind of remain cool that is not inside your house. For some people in hot climates, maybe what that would mean is digging kind of a cellar, getting some retaining wall block, and kind of just digging a hole so it's at least sheltered by the ground a little bit. It might be a little bit cooler. Keep it out of the shade, or keep it in the shade, out of the direct sun. Keep it as cool as possible. So that's my biggest recommendation is, because a lot of people ask me, they're like, I've stored fuel and in like less than a month, it's already bad. And I've always asked myself, why have I had great success storing fuel? I've stored fuel in portable cans for like a year. Metal cans, I think the longest is like, it was right under 2 years. It was like 20 months before I used it, which isn't necessarily recommended, which I'll get to rotation in a second. But I've always asked myself, like, why do I have such good luck? And the big thing is because it gets so freaking cold here. It's literally, when it's like around that 0 degree mark, it's literally kind of blocking enzymes and bacteria and phase separation from happening within that fuel. And I'm not a chemist, I'm not a scientist. That's just my layman perspective, my layman kind of understanding of maybe why I have better luck than other people that live in hot, humid environments.